All right, with any luck, you can see my Roon screen. You can see I decided to go with the dark theme. The white theme has been popular with Roon marketing folks, but when I'm in the loft, it's usually dark. And so I don't want a giant tablet blaring in my face with all the bright colors or whatever. So, off the bat, you have these sort of large buttons up here for finding your music, which I think is kind of nice. Before, if I wanted to go to my albums, I was always going over here and clicking on albums. But now the album buttons are a little bit more accessible. I usually have things sorted by date added because I'm usually interested in whatever I've bought recently. I think that's kind of a holdover from how I organized my physical CDs. I had kind of a recent rack where I had all the recent stuff, and then later on I would eventually shuffle them in kind of alphabetical order at some point down the road. The filter option works pretty nicely, and you can even in the screen. Let me switch to sort by artist or sort by title. Maybe album title is a good thing. So if I type in if I just start typing on the screen Dire Straits, I should sort by artist, so it makes more sense. If I just start typing Dire Straits, it kind of scrolls really quickly and jumps down to the Dire Straits albums. Now, this works on kind of the desktop interface. I don't think there's a way to bring up a keyboard for the tablet interface, but it's something if you're on a desktop, you're using a laptop to kind of control or queue up or plan your music selection. That's a trick that worked in the other one. It worked a little bit differently, but it's kind of a time-saving feature for just jumping really quickly to where you want to be. If you're used to Windows Explorer, Windows Explorer has a similar type of feature for if you type the first few letters of whatever file name you're looking for, it'll scroll down really quickly to where you want to be. The filter thing kind of works pretty well as well. So if you just type in, Diana, for example, it'll just really quickly only show you the stuff that matches whatever that character is. And I don't think it matters how you have things sorted. It's still going to look for things with Diana in it, or whatever you type in that box. So whenever you see this little funnel thing and it shows up in a bunch of different places throughout the interface, that's just a kind of quick way to really dial in on whatever you're trying to find without having to type a whole lot of stuff. And I think that this element does exist on the phone or tablet interface. So that's something to watch out for. It's not super obvious because it's just kind of hiding up there like that.
These are albums that are on your computer, is that correct?
Yeah, these are albums that are on my, well, actually, if you look, right? Oh, I'm glad you brought that up because I'm going to explain that too. So these are in my library. My library is
that can be a force. That's a great signing, I think, by the Cardinals for sure. All right, on the recruiting end, speaking of signings.
Sorry.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, so some of these albums are all in my library. They're not necessarily physical ones that I own, though most of them I think that you're seeing in this view are. You can see this top left one has the little T that indicates it's a title album. And I'll show how to have your albums marked with kind of this extra information here in just a little bit. The way that you do that has changed a bit with Roon 1.8. But before I do that, they've changed the focus thing quite a bit. Before, I actually kind of liked the way it worked before a lot better. And a lot of people are trying to kind of figure out how to make sense of it. Now you could click this arrow here to drop down this thing, and then they've eliminated horizontal scroll for a lot of the application, but then it remains for places like this where I think it's just really kind of a mess to navigate. It makes me dizzy to see this huge pile of text scrolling by. And then if you don't see all the release dates that you're interested in, apparently they assume that we're old guys and we only listen to music from 1910 to 1960. If you want anything more than that, then you got to bring up this box here, and this gives you the interface that's more similar to what we had with the previous focus, where you've got the histogram of your album release dates and what's going on, and you can kind of dial in a range. But
David, if you had albums from Kobos, would that be included in this list?
If you have albums in Kobos that are in your library, so you've done whatever the Kobos equivalent of favoriting the album, so that it becomes, or you've in the Roon interface, you can say, I want to add this Kobos album to my library. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've purchased it and downloaded it. It just means that you've marked it as something that you want to have, you know, at ready access in your library. Does that make sense?
I understand.
All right, cool. So you know,
Question
one of
for
the
you,
things that,
Can I ask something? I submitted
sure.
a couple of questions and I don't know if they've got forwarded on to you.
I have not received anything over email.
Okay, well, maybe she sent them to Stephen, but I would like to address a couple of questions I have about how this new 1.8 works, whenever it's convenient for you.
Fire, we're in a good spot. Fire away.
Okay. Well, one is just plain, I put on a bunch of albums and I went in and thought I had deleted them, and they stay on the list. It just says now they're unavailable. So how do I actually just take them off out of the whole list once and for all? You know what I'm talking about? I apparently done it in a manner that they don't like.
You're saying that you're in this my albums view and the albums are here, but you can't play them?
Well, if I'm on my playlist and I pull up the playlist and I
Oh, you're talking about a playlist. I see.
yeah. Okay, so you probably have a playlist. So if you open it up and you see 100 songs,
Right.
it will say next to the title, not available. And those are ones that I tried to delete. They didn't delete, they just won't play, but they still show in here. So how do I just totally get rid of it?
That is, I know that on some of the if you've got an older playlist, that some of the tracks might have fallen off of a streaming service and might no longer be available. And that I've seen that happen before from time to time.
Well, that's something I did because they were available. Then I decided I didn't want them, or I duplicated something. I tried to get them out incorrectly. So what's the method for just deleting something in your playlist?
Roon's playlist feature is kind of a mess. So I tend not to use it very much, but
actually, David, it's sorry to barge in there. It's pretty
please.
easy. I've done this just yesterday. I was doing this. The three dots over to the right, if you click on that, you should see a thing that allows you to, at least in a Windows view, or even on my phone, I did this, remove from playlist. There you go.
Well, I see that. Now let me see what happens.
Interestingly, some of the things that I removed from my playlist, I searched for them again and they were available. So whether the original source that I added them to a playlist was unavailable, but when I searched for the same thing by the same artist, I could find it elsewhere and then add it to the playlist. So you just got to be more active.
All right, well, let me try it as we speak, because I'm going to pull up the playlist that I had the issues with and see if they're...
Now, the thing to keep in mind is the only playlists that you can edit in Roon are native playlists. So if you see these playlists here that have this inverted T, this title logo, I won't be able to edit anything that's inside of those playlists. If I try to do anything...
But then you can go into title and edit them there. Or
yeah, I can go into title and edit them there. Exactly. And sometimes you may have like an iTunes logo. If you have an iTunes playlist, that means there's like an iTunes XML file on your hard drive someplace. And so you have to edit that file in that external environment. You can't edit them from within Roon. So pay attention to that. If you as long as you don't have anything kind of sitting to the left of those three dots, then you should be able to edit.
You know what happened? I realized I went and edited the items across the top and added release date, which pushed the three dots off my screen.
Oh, okay.
Seeing them now, I've moved it over and I found them and it's working. So thank you for that.
All right, good. Question number 2.
One of my questions. Now, can I give you the second one just for the hell of it?
Sure, we're all here.
Okay, let's say I decide that I'm done with Roon or done with Qobuz or any of these people. Are these playlists? Is there any way I can save them somewhere?
There is an export feature. I don't like it very much because it's a little, how we say, heavy-handed. So again, this only applies to playlists that you created, you know, inside of the Roon interface itself. So if I take a look at this one, if I think there are several different kind of annoying features of this. It looks like I see in this playlist that there are some tracks that are from title. You see the T next to them in really kind of faint gray letters, and then some tracks that are in my own library. If I export, it's been a while since I've done this, but if I export this playlist, it's going to ask me where I want to put it, and I can, you know, put it, you know, someplace on my desktop or downloads or whatever. Sure. It's going to actually try to copy all of the music files that are in this playlist to that folder, which I don't really want. I don't want it to copy. I just want the playlist. I don't want the files. The files are on my NAS or wherever they are, right? I just like for it to create like an M3U file or an XML file that has the
Yeah, in
tracks
my
in it.
case, I was hoping to get the whole thing, and it downloaded maybe 20% and then quit.
Yeah, it'll it'll create like a, if you have a playlist with thousands of songs, it's going to copy like many gigabytes worth of files to your folder, which is not what you want. All you want is just the, a list of the tracks that were there. And in the case of title tracks, obviously it can't copy them, so I'm not really sure what its behavior is, if it just leaves them out or what. I can experiment later. We can experiment if we run out of things to talk about. Maybe create a playlist that just has 1 or 2 songs from Tidal or Qobuz and see if it does anything at all.
I have a playlist of say 150 songs, and I want to share it with some friends, or I want to make it a thumb drive and give it to some people. Can I do that with this Roon Qobuz that I have, or not?
You can't do it with Qobuz playlists or Tidal playlists because Roon won't be able to export them. For your local playlists, playlists that have only albums that you own, Roon, when you try to export them, will export or create a copy of all the files as well, which you could load onto a thumb drive and give to somebody. But I mean, most of the time, what you want to do when you're trying to share a playlist with people in a kind of social listening type of way is to give them a way to import the playlist into Roon so that they can play it and hook it up with whatever streaming service that they have. So what I tend to do in that case is create the playlist in Tidal, since I'm a Tidal subscriber. And then if you're a Qobuz subscriber and I want to share that playlist with you, I'll go to the SoundIs website. Am I saying that right? It's a website that lets you import a playlist from one streaming service, and it'll create a link to an equivalent playlist for another streaming service. So if I'm on Tidal and you're on Qobuz, I can create a Qobuz playlist for you. I can send you the URL, and you can import that into your library, and we can both be listening to the same music, barring any cases where there's a album that's only on one streaming service or the other. And in that case, I'm avoiding albums that are in my local library, because the only way for you to listen to those would be for me to send you the files. But there's probably an equivalent file on the streaming service or close enough that you could share.
So there's no way to copy a file that I don't own, that I just streamed.
Right. You can create you can outside of Roon, you can create a playlist on Qobuz and share that playlist with people. You can create a playlist in Tidal and share that. And with the SoundIs service, you can let me see if I can find the link real quick, and I'll paste it in the chat.
Share the people that necessarily have these services. The people I'd want to share them with probably wouldn't not necessarily have a service at all. Be lucky if they had a place to plug in a thumb drive, but
yeah, in that case it gets harder. You might have to just invite them over or something.
No, I mean, if it's not a feature, it's not a feature. I didn't know. It's kind of a dumb question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
It's probably has to do with the fact that there's no common standard for creating playlists across systems, across
that is
services.
Exactly right.
That's the problem.
Oh,
Maybe they'll get to that one of these days.
Maybe they will. I
yeah,
can't find our
Spotify's supposed to be going into high res now. I wonder if that'll make a difference.
So I just pasted in the comments this soundiz.com thing. I created a free account on there that allows me to share playlists up to 200 tracks. If you want to do fancier things, then you can pay $5 a year or something like that. And so it's a pretty useful tool for that kind of stuff. I've never had it fail so far. In fact, I've got some people who, like you say, are neither on Tidal nor Qobuz, and I was able to create a playlist of music. I would take one of my Tidal playlists and create a equivalent playlist in YouTube, and they could load up the playlist and I guess listen to music on YouTube. I don't really understand, since to me it's a video thing, but it's what the kids are doing. So this person was able to listen to the playlist on YouTube, and they were satisfied with that solution. So you know, it can convert playlists to kind of a large number of things. Again, totally outside of the scope of Roon, but nonetheless may be interesting if you're wanting to do that sort of thing.
David, does Roon give access to the Kobas playlist?
Roon gets read-only access to Koba's playlist, as far as I understand. I don't have Koba, so I haven't verified that, but I believe that to be the case. Yes.
Okay.
All right, cool. Let's go back to that filter thing. So I want to show you some kind of fun things. Actually, since we're already distracted, let me go to settings. I hope I can remember where this is now. I want to say, here we go. Yeah. So you've got under the general settings, you've got some options that you can include. You can show playlists on the album page, which I haven't done. This looks new to me. I don't think I've seen these last two options. Maybe they're part of this most recent build. Yeah, I know that people are complaining that tags were missing and playlists as well. So I would recommend turning these things on. They'll give you some more options for adding tags or managing tags as well as albums and playlists, you know, in the course of your looking at music. So when you're looking at an album page, next to each one of the tracks, you can add tags or add those tracks to a playlist if you want to, just kind of on the fly. So they're off by default, but I think they're probably useful. I usually have hidden tracks and albums disabled because I hid them for a reason. But I guess if you want to go hunt for those or try to figure out what you've hidden or not, that's useful to turn on. But I usually have everything else. In the older version, I had all the other stuff turned on. I recommend doing the same regardless of what the defaults are, and using it like that for a while until you decide what you feel like you care about or not. This is the button that I wanted to show you before, because this was kind of hidden. You click on this customize album display. You click on edit here. You can choose what little thingamabobs are going to show up as overlays on your albums in an album view. And that now it doesn't show these everywhere that you see an album in Roon, but when you're specifically in the album section, you're able to see some kind of additional kind of markings. So for example, you get the title badge if you have a title album, which I like to have. I like to know if an album's in my library or not, or maybe I have a physical copy of an album plus I've added it in title, and I want to, you know, deduplicate those. So this helps me kind of know which albums I need to do that with. Or like there may be some albums that I really enjoy, and I've had them in my library because of title for so long, I just assumed that I bought them at some point. This helps me to remember which ones, you know, if I were to give up title, I should go out and make sure that I have a physical copy of that album. This helps me kind of remember that that album's living on borrowed time. You know, the other problem with albums and a streaming service is that they could, you know, go away. Like who's the Pono guy?
Neil Young.
Yeah, so Neil Young like pulled all of his albums from title because he doesn't like Kobas. So if you're a Neil Young fan, you know, now you've got to go you've got to subscribe to Kobas because he's not on title anymore, or you need to go and buy all of his albums if you don't have them already, because you don't get to play them anymore. Maybe you were able to on title for a while, but not anymore because he's mad at MQA. So these people have tempers and they do irrational things, or maybe it was a rational thing. I don't know. I'm not a fan of MQA myself anyway. So, but those are kind of things to help you remember that stuff. You know, you can choose this pick page just is whether, I guess, the people at title like the album and they recommend that you should like it too. So I think that's really probably artists pay a certain amount of money to have that checkbox show up on their albums. I'm not really sure how it works. You know, the star rating, which is not very useful to me. The live badge sometimes is nice. But, you know, you want to kind of experiment with those things. If you have a bootleg albums, you can have a bootleg thing. If you want to know if it's MQA or not, you can switch that thing on. These are just kind of, they clutter up your display maybe a little bit. It'll be uncommon for you to have an album that has all of the indicators on. This little, looks like a stack of books here. Is just an icon to let you know that that album is in your library. If you're in the albums view, all of the albums will have that, so I don't think that shows up, but it shows up in other displays where you might have a mix of albums, like in recommendations, you might have a mix of albums that are in your library or not. But anyway, not to spend too much time on it, I encourage you to open that up. I think by default, most or all of these things are turned off. You'll want to turn on all of them or most of them for a while until you get a feel for what it does and how it works. And then there's some things about sorting order and other things that are really boring. So you can explore those later. But now if I go to my albums page, I can see I've got the little red dot for live albums. And there may be, this one is MQA and it's on title. So I get both of those little icons now. And, it helps maybe to just visually get a sense of what's on here. This page is almost entirely albums that are on title, except for a couple. So I can kind of figure out what's what. All right, back to Focus. Any questions before we dig into Focus a little bit?
So what do you use the tags for?
Tags, right. Tags are useful for kind of keeping up with, here's a good way. They're almost like those little yellow stickies that you would stick on, physical items. So you might use the yellow, or they could be different colors, right? But you might stick one of these little tabs on all of your Christmas albums. So when it's the holidays time, you can go through your library and pull out all the Christmas albums and find them very quickly. So if I go to tags, we've got, for example, a Christmas albums tag. And so if I click on that, it's going to, every album that I've tagged with this Christmas tag will just sort of show up here. And so now I've got Christmas albums that I can play pretty readily. If you go, I've got another one, Alessandro Galetti's a guy from Florence, Italy, that I've been corresponding with over email. And I've purchased pretty much all of his albums. But his name's kind of long for me to type. So I've got a tag that just lets me pull up all of his albums really quickly to be able to find them. So, and tags can be, they can be arbitrary. They could be compositions, they could be genres, they could be anything that has any meaning to you. You can take any album that's in your library and you can add a tag to it.
The other thing about tags is that as you populate, let's say your own library, or you pull things from the streaming services, it seems as though you get stuck having tags that have already been applied based upon the database that they're using. And so it used to be really crazy. You'd look in a genre and you'd find someone that you'd say, wait a minute, he's an opera singer. Why is he in rock? And so you'd have to go in and find the album and remove the tag so that it wouldn't appear. So it made more sense. So it's a combination of things. It's sort of a two-way street. Your own purposeful tags that, like you were showing, as opposed to the ones that you're given by default.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind is you can have more than one profile inside of Roon. Not everybody uses multiple profiles, but if you're a household that does, you can, tags that you create can be tags that only show up or that only have functionality when you're using your profile, and then you can have tags that you share with other members of the household. And so, like Deb has her own Christmas tags that are for her are different from mine. I think she's got a bigger Christmas tag, so 103 albums on it.
Wow.
And so
David, can you tag Christmas albums so that they don't play in shuffle? I asked you about this years ago and there wasn't a way to do it. And so I actually have to move my folder with the Christmas albums out of the designated library for Roon so that they don't play in the middle of summer.
Yeah, no, I people have that question a lot, and that's a common solution. I don't know that I've found necessarily a better one for shuffle play. But people will go to settings and storage, and instead of having all their music in one location, they'll add a second location.
They'll
take all their Christmas albums and just drag them into a separate folder, and then they can just go and say, I want to disable that folder when it's not Christmas time, and those albums won't show up.
What if you have one Roon player and you've got children and you want them not to see music with explicit lyrics? That's a perfect example, right?
Oh yeah. Good luck.
Wow.
I don't know that. I know that there is a Roon will show a little E if there's explicit lyrics. But as far as parental controls go, and like what the default sort of view is for different folks here, I don't know that the Roon folks have given much thought to that. But the other thing I would say is if there's features like that that you're interested in, I'm well past the age where I need, I'm concerned about what my kids are looking at, or any more than I should be anyway. They're probably more concerned about what I'm looking at. Then I could, you can go to the Roon community.roonlabs.com and raise a feature request, and other people will chime in, and it may show up in Roon 2.13 or whatever, and maybe we'll all still be alive and using it. I don't know. We'll see. But that is a possibility. Good suggestions. There are some, kind of clever things you can do to build bookmarks that have some of these things that you're talking about. Like I have a bookmark for all of my Alessandro albums, and you can take collections of tags that you've built a search for and bookmark those, and then you can quickly go back to them. But as far as like David was saying, how do I exclude Christmas albums or albums that are tagged with Christmas kind of in general for shuffle? I don't know of a way to do that. You could do it by default. You could do it with a bookmark. So I've got Christmas albums here. So I've built a tag called, I've got a Christmas albums bookmark. If I click on this, I can negate this tag. And so now this is showing me all my albums that aren't Christmas albums. And I could then create a bookmark saying, probably not spelling it right, but Scrooge's playlist. Now anytime I go to this, wherever it went down here, Scrooge's playlist thing, I get a view of my library without any Christmas albums, and then I could shuffle that, and I would be able to play only non-Christmas albums. But I have to remember to go to that, create that bookmark, and then remember to load it up before I hit shuffle to exclude those albums. And the same principle could be applied to albums with explicit lyrics or whatever else. You can, once you have a tag, you can in focus, you can negate that tag. So you can see this is somewhat reduced my album collection that's being displayed here, and that's available for playback. But as far as like enforcing that for a profile or any kind of parental controls mechanism, that's not something that's presently contemplated.
David, may I ask a couple questions? I don't mean to get into the Christmas thing too much, but what about having a separate controller for my wife on her, say, laptop, separate from my laptop? Can she use Roon the way I use it if we load it a second time on her computer?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Roon is all about multiple zones and multiple control devices.
Okay.
So we have, I don't know, half dozen of them, and then we have different people. My son and daughter are only here during the holidays, but I set up different profiles for them, so when they're listening to music in their whatever room they're staying in or whatever, they have their own history, their own
Okay, so that's a pretty straightforward process, I take it.
Oh yeah, you can just go. I think right in here, there's a way to manage profiles, and so you can add more people. The other thing that people don't really may not be aware of is that you can hook up your. There's my birthday. You can hook up your profile to Last.fm if you want it to record kind of a trail of everything that you've ever played, so that weird people can see what you've been listening to, or that people can market to you. It's not a feature that people use very much. I think I connected mine a long time ago just because it worked, but I don't really care.
I have a second question I want to interrupt with again.
Yeah, sure.
My basketball game's going to start in a second, so I'm going to have to sign off. But the last question is, let's just say we want to share our playlists, our best playlists, with other members, and I might think that that's an easy way for me to find great music. Is there a way the club can do that?
Yeah, again,
everybody submit their playlist, and then I can pull it off the website or something and say, okay, well, this guy likes what I like, or this guy doesn't like what I like,
Yeah, there's not a great service for that on the website. What we could do is have a page in a few forums with members' names, and under those member names, links to playlists on either Tidal or Qobuz. So if I stop sharing this, and let me get a new browser window here, and I start sharing this, where did we go? Here we go. If I go to listen.tidal.com and playlists. I have oh, I need my playlist. Sorry, hang on.
You don't need to show me, but if there's a way to set that up, it might be really useful for everybody in the club.
Yeah. So we just need to have a web page on our site. Here's my playlists here, I guess. So this is this Orchard audio demo thing. If I click on share, I can get a link to the playlist that's been copied to my clipboard. I can paste it up here. So this is a link to this playlist, what you're seeing right here in the address bar. Now, and I can actually visit it. We'll see it looks a little bit differently. If we posted these links onto a page in forum, and I imagine the Kobos has a similar capability for creating.
Kobos has the same thing. Yeah, same thing in Kobos.
Then you could go to our community web page, and people could copy these links and add them to their Tidal or Kobos account, or they could use that Soundist thing to convert between this link between whatever streaming service I'm using and whatever streaming service you're using. And then once you kind of favorite that link in whatever your favorite streaming service is, and then go back to Roon and tell it to kind of update, then that playlist will show up and you're able to play. It's a little convoluted, but there's no reason why it couldn't work.
Something that you could suggest, Larry, or whoever's doing the newsletter now, put instructions into the next newsletter, so everybody who wants to share their lists can share their lists, and people can know where to go get a list from audio files, which might be a pretty good list.
Yeah. And then, like I said, the Last FM thing works. So anybody who knows D Snyder 0 CNN can go look at my Last FM and see the stuff that I've been listening to. Now, being an audio file, there's a fair amount of that is me running in equipment. And so I may have, 100 hours of the same album on repeat showing up in my history because I've got a zone that's busy burning in cables or a DAC or whatever else. And so I don't know of a good way to tell it to not count things that I wasn't actually in the room hearing when the burn-in process was happening. So, or when the kind of logging process was happening. All right, so we've covered a lot of kind of nerdy techie stuff. I'd like to show one thing that that I was kind of frustrated that changed a bit and has stopped some of these things from working. So one of the bookmarks that I had was a bookmark of well-mastered albums. And what this did was it pulled up all the albums in my library that had one of these people in the production credits, any one of these people. Roon has changed the meaning of these tags. So now this only shows albums for which every one of these people were credited in some way in production. And of course there are none, because that would be amazing. That all of these mastering engineers and mixing engineers would collaborate on a single album. It would be the most expensive album ever made. Also, too many cooks in the kitchen may apply, and so it also might be one of the worst albums that was ever made. Unfortunately, this functionality is a bit broken. They've changed the meaning of these to be sort of in computer logic terms. These are all anded together instead of ored together, right? So. Yeah. So that made me sad, but there are some interesting things that you can now do with this that you couldn't do before because they are anded together. So if I can find production, there it is. This damn horizontal scrolling thing makes me insane. All right, if I wanted to know, I know that Al Schmidt is a pretty darn good mixing engineer, so I can pick him, and I know that Doug Sachs is one of the best mastering engineers, kind of bar none. So I can pick him as well. And now this shows all the albums that Al Schmidt and Doug Sachs worked together on. I couldn't easily do that before, but now I can do that. And that, as an audiophile, gives me, for a lot of people, they're looking at, who played bass or who played piano, who the performers are. For us nerds, we tend to be more interested in who is behind the mixing console, actually making whoever is in front of it sound as good as they possibly can. And so it provides a little bit of a different lens for that kind of stuff. And I can also, you can remember, these are invertible. So if I want to know, all the albums that Al Schmidt worked on that Doug Sachs didn't work on, you know, maybe I'm looking for, because I figure Al Schmidt knows how to collaborate with people in an intelligent way. He must work with other people that are pretty good. So, you know, I could take a look at this album, for example, and look in the credits and see, well, who did Al, since he wasn't working with Doug Sachs, who did he work with instead? Because maybe that guy is worth following as well. And obviously it was Bernie Grundeman. So if I wasn't familiar with Bernie Grundeman as a mastering engineer, now I would be, just by his association with Al Schmidt. Actually, probably most of the time it goes the other direction. People start with Bernie and then look at who he's working with. But nonetheless, you get the idea. So that's I think, you know, it's there. It's still, I think, kind of useful. Another thing, we go to, they use this example, I think, on their video as well. But if we go to Miles Davis and we take a look at discography, I've got a few albums that I've loaded into my library, but he has a bunch more. These are now sorted by popularity, I think, based on valence data. So before, you know, you couldn't really see an artist's discography on a streaming service and sorted any other way than just by release date, either forwards or backwards. Now, if I'm new to Miles Davis, I can see which albums are the most popular of his, but 138 is a lot to kind of tackle. So I can go into Focus now, and I don't know why Frederick Cornell would be conducting Miles Davis, but whatever. Maybe I just want to know, because I'm an MQA fan, I want to know which of his albums are in MQA format, available in MQA format. So now I can see, sorted by popularity, the MQA albums by Miles Davis that are available for streaming. If I don't like MQA, I can turn that. Oops, I thought that was negatable. Right, let's see. I don't see a little minus thingy there.
Oh.
Lame. Apparently format's not negatable. So that's a little bit unfortunate. Or which albums are in DSD? I guess I have one of those. You know, so these things can be combined in kind of interesting ways. I'm really curious to know what this one is. All right, I guess this is like a sampler, and so that Frederick Fresnel was not actually conducting Miles Davis. That would be also a pretty interesting.
You're just cohabiting.
Yeah, they're cohabiting the same random shuffling of albums. You know, and then, you know, there's certainly genres and other things you can kind of combine to try to filter. Maybe you're just interested in his universal days or whatever. You can filter down on some of these categories, so you can figure out, you know, how to approach somebody who has a larger discography in a little bit of a simpler way. So if we just pick one of these, and I go to credits, this is the only way that I've really kind of found to do this. If I'm looking in production credits, this person, Ellen Pitton, was the mastering engineer for this particular album, but she also did, or was involved in, this one. I think Bernie did most of the mastering work for this one, but I guess she must have done some of the mastering work on some of the tracks as well. If we go in discography here, I can see, including not just what's on my local library, but also on Tidal, different albums that this particular mastering engineer was involved with. And also, I can sort those by popularity. So this is, she's obviously knows what she's doing, and this is a popular album. There are a lot of albums on here that are pretty impressive that I could now start exploring. And you couldn't do any of this stuff with 1.7. You couldn't kind of drill into what's going on your streaming service with these things. If I'm just concerned with what role, what album she worked on as a mastering engineer, I can filter her role. Maybe I'm not interested in R&B, but maybe I'm interested in just jazz albums that she worked on. Now I can, you know, explore albums that she did mastering work on from that perspective. So, you know, pretty cool. And then if this album is something that I think is pretty cool that I want to explore later on, I can add it to my library, and it'll show up as something that I can watch or listen to kind of down the road. Cool. So that's how I've been using Focus to find all kinds of things that that were more difficult to find or not quite possible to find before. And then where are we here? If I go to the home screen, they usually have some recommendations as well. So they've got this new releases for you thing. It's kind of different from what they were doing before. And you can change how you want to kind of break this down. You can sort it by newest or sort it by relevance. Like I kept seeing the same things over and over again when I had it sorted by relevance, which I guess to some extent makes sense. But I'd have to scroll down to find things that were new from the last time I looked at it. So I switched to sorting by newest. I think relevance is the default sorting, which I think makes sense until you've used it for a week and you don't see any changes, and then it doesn't make sense anymore. And then, and presumably this information is based on my listening habits, along with some data that is sourced by crowdsourced and relevance. Like this is a pretty interesting album that I was checking out. Now that I've got those icons turned on, I can see which of these are MQA just by looking to see if they have that squiggly line on them, and use that as a way to decide if I want to explore them or avoid them. And then there's some genre filters and other types of things, or you can look at singles. So that's kind of how this part is different. I haven't found this report information to be particularly useful, knowing how much I've spent listening to music or when I've been listening, what day of the week, or things like that. But you could explore that and see if there are any surprises. They do say that the uninstrumented life is not worth living. So looks like my camera's died again. It does that sometimes. So now you can say that you're instrumented in a different way.
One thing I was wondering about, David, is a lot of times if you're really into, let's say, groups of musicians, and where they started and who they played with and how they moved around from group to group and that kind of thing, is there a way to sort of shed light on that through Roon at this point?
I think that like for an individual artist, definitely. So
but you don't get like a 23andMe tree.
Yeah, not exactly. But I mean, like Al Jarreau's performed with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so if I go to Al Jarreau, and I go to, do they just show it right here? They show like some collaboration. They'll kind of, they've got some curated collaboration projects that he's worked on, and they should have like about 100 of these. I guess they've got a few things put together here, but you know, as far as if I go to, I think maybe I have to go to discography to see projects that he's worked on. Where does it? I get to keep going here on appearances. This is pretty much the way it was before, right? So different albums that he has performed on. Probably a better example would be like Ron Carter, because he's played bass with a whole bunch of different folks. Let's see if they've got any kind of useful breakouts here of different collaborations. So there's a couple of collaborator types of things. They've got this new artists in their prime thing, which in the group people have been complaining about. They feel like that is somehow denigrating to people to say that they were in their prime during certain years. I mean, when was Ron Carter in his prime? He's been awesome like forever. So why single out just 2 years? Does that even make sense? But certainly if you go to discography and we scroll down to folks that albums that he's appeared with, you know, they kind of break it down because he's appeared with so many folks. So we've got, you know, he's on 40 Miles Davis albums, he's on 21 Herbie Hancocks and 19 George Bensons, and so on and so forth. And so that could give you a sense of, you know, an artist that tends to travel around or be parts of different groups. I don't know if this is, I don't think this is in the sense that you were really kind of thinking of, but
could be worse.
Yeah, I mean, and you can take, you know, you can take pretty much a lot of these albums have pretty detailed credits, so you know, you can go through here.
It's not like you could pick a particular artist in the way you just showed before, where you could actually do a focus for the artist.
Yeah, I mean, you can totally do a focus. I mean, the way that you're in effect you're doing is, you know, you're pulling up a specific artist, and then, you know, going at it from.
What if you go to focus there on the left?
If we go to focus here on the left, I can see.
Okay, so now you do have
I can say I want him to be a performer.
Okay.
And maybe I want to know, you know, what was his role, or who was his
But there's
producer.
nothing to the right here.
They've
That
got,
arrow.
let's see.
Right.
I can single in who,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I could single in who else was on these albums, since these are all kind of ended together.
Right.
So if I want to know, you know, who, which albums he and Chick Corea were on together,
Right.
I can
Okay.
focus in on that kind of stuff.
It ain't perfect, but it works for the most
Perfect,
part.
but it works.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if this was something that I came to pretty often, you know, I could also create a bookmark for this that I could use to come back to later on, because this is dynamic, right? If well, maybe it's not dynamic if these folks aren't performing anymore, or recording anymore, but for somebody who's recording still, if they put out a new album, then this will get refreshed with whatever that album is, especially if you sort it by, you know, date, most recent, things like that. So it could be worth bookmarking some of these things.
Huh.
But I mean, you know, you take a look at how we used to manage and navigate a local library of, you remember when you had CD racks? Some of you still do. My CDs are all in boxes now instead.
Yeah.
You know, I pretty much knew what I wanted to listen to, you know, roughly by sort of visually where it was on the rack, but I would forget about things, and I wouldn't come back to them for a really long time. Or, you know, I mean, an artist that I really liked and was following actively, I might just stop following because I changed plans, and they might be putting out all kinds of cool new music that I'd be interested in. And unless I went to the local record store or spent some time rediscovering what the dusty parts of corners of my album rack that I hadn't explored, I might not ever kind of get back to that stuff. So Roon kind of nudges you along and keeps you engaged with all these things. And I think that a lot of the changes that they've made have made some improvements. If nothing else, they've stirred up the pot enough that, you know, if you're stuck in your musical habits, you'll kind of take some time to re-explore some of this stuff.
Well, that's why the radio function is so nice, because it actually will automate some of that for you.
Yeah, kind of forces you to look into that stuff. And if you look at my recent albums, sorted by date added, I've got a filter on. Let me turn that off. You're seeing a lot of DSF or DSD64 formatted albums. And if you see that there's this SACD that's in kind of the version information, all that means is that when I created the folder where this album lives, I put in parentheses SACD in the folder name. It's not in the metadata, but it is just in the folder name. And Roon kind of plucks that information out when it scans the library, and it includes that as version information, which is you know, kind of helpful, as I can quickly see that these are SACD rips that I've done. I spent this weekend ripping all 22 of my SACDs since I discovered that I have a drive that actually works for that. So that was kind of fun to reconnect with some of this music. What else? I just remembered that our esteemed colleague even had some things he wanted me to share too. So questions while I'm fiddling around and trying to find
on the radio function. Can you show that for a second? Does it just have radio stations, or does it kind of composite a special radio thing just for you, or what?
There's a separate area called both local and world. I forgot the two terminologies they have for radio that are actually radio stations around the world.
Yeah. So there's this my live radio thing, and there's this, I guess, general live radio as well. So let's go to this general live radio, and these are kind of these radio stations around the world. And I'm trying to remember how they're filtered. So local radio stations are within 100 miles of each other, of where I guess wherever it thinks on the internet that I am. To me, it's not hugely useful because I don't really, for internet streaming, I don't really necessarily care how far away the radio stations are. These are recently played. Let me go down to local stations. So I don't necessarily care how far away they are. I just mostly want to know what their streaming bit rate is. So 32 kilobits per second is going to be okay for voice. It's not going to be great for classical music, for example. And so I think I'd like to be able to filter on, show me everything that's 128 kilobits or higher, or things like that. If you filter these or sort them by popularity, which I think I've done someplace, it's been a while since I've been on this page. The popular ones tend to actually sound not as terrible. And maybe I've done that in my live radio. So there's some radio stations that I've kind of added to my, or favorited, or however you want to describe it. And if we scroll down here, this one is a jazz station that's 320 kilobits per second, which is listenable, I think. You can kind of add these. And if that you're just, the radio station is broadcasting live, and at the same time, they've got an MP3 encoder that's encoding as a live audio encoding stream, and you could listen to it in a web browser or whatever else. But Roon has kind of aggregated some of that stuff here. The other thing that Roon calls a radio feature is this here. So if you choose any album just randomly in your collection and you click Start Radio, it's going to start playing probably the first track or so in this album. But if I go to the queue, under Roon Radio, it says the next track that it's going to play, unless I tell it that I don't want it to, is Eugene Ruffolo. Presumably he is a artist who makes music that's not entirely unlike or inconsistent with the musings of Sarah Kay. If I disagreed with that assessment, then I could thumbs down it and say this doesn't fit. I probably just ruined everything. I'm going to say it's just not related. And now it's offered, while this track is still playing, it's offering maybe the next track, Brooke Miller might be a better choice. And I can say, yeah, that sounds groovy. And, I can thumbs up or thumbs down these things if I'm familiar with them. If I'm not, I just have to wait for them to get to the top of the queue so that I can hear them. And once I can hear them, I can skip them if I think they're not appropriate. And all this information Roon is using to build a kind of machine learning intelligence so that it's able to better kind of steer other people who might have started off Roon Radio listening to Sarah Kay and give them a little bit better experience. And I've just made that experience a little bit worse potentially by skipping a track that might have been a perfect fit. But
I think sometimes I've played an album or something that I came across, and when it finishes the out, I'm just doing my thing and it's playing, and it's maybe starts after that album to start doing this and playing these other albums that I didn't even select or anything. And I go, that doesn't sound like the same artist. And
no, you're absolutely right. And this happens to me as well. It happened February last year when I was trying to give a talk to you guys as well. I had just created a new zone because I was setting up for the show, right? And by default, whenever you add a new zone to Roon, in your audio settings here, like if I were to enable system output or whatever, if I enable any of these zones that are not previously enabled and haven't been before, by default, Roon's going to have Roon Radio enabled for that zone. I guess they're so proud of the feature, they want you to accidentally discover that it exists as much as possible. I pretty much never want that to happen. Like, because like I was listening, I just set up a new DAC in the loft. I just enabled it and I listened to an album. It was time to go to sleep. So I shut the system down and went to sleep. When I came back in the morning, it was still playing shit that it was like, on radio mode and cycling through things. It had been downloading music and playing things all night long, which was okay, but it's not what I wanted. Like, most of the time I play something and then when it's done, I want it to stop, because that's when you put a record on, it doesn't just go into your record collection and get more records and play.
They're making money from Comcast and AT&T for the downloads.
Yeah, or maybe these artists get 1/10 trillionth of 1 penny every time something's played, and so maybe that's helpful for them as well. I don't really know, but
they also still have that double whammy. I mean, basically, if you decide you want to stop the radio from functioning, you have to actually disable it in two ways.
You do, absolutely right. Let's go
sort of crazy.
Let's go to this zone here. Let me go to the queue. If this is on, Let me skip to the end. That's hard for me to see because this is past the edge of the screen here. If I go to the end of this thing, it's going to say that there's another track that it wants to play.
Right.
If we, I'm just going to let it get to that point where it starts playing that one. Should be about done. Come on. All right. So, I have to say end here because I don't want it to keep playing music forever. And then I have to also say no here. That's where I messed up last February.
Yep.
You have to say no to both of those places. Otherwise, it's just going to keep doing it. So if you've set up a new zone, you'll be caught by that at some point. It's only a matter of time.
But one of these days, they're going to make this voice accessible. So you'll just
That
say, Alexa, I want you to play the following things. And when it ends, I want you to kill everything.
That's right. Shut it all down. There are people who are experimenting with voice interface for Roon, and I agree that that's an eventuality. The other thing that I don't listen to a lot of classical music. This is one of the recordings that I kind of cut my teeth on as a young audiophile back in the previous century. And so it's been really fun to hear it was recorded originally in this 50-bit, sorry, not 50-bit, 50 kilohertz direct stream digital recording system before we'd figured out what we wanted to do with digital. And back then there was no convenient way to resample a 50-bit or a 50 kilohertz recording to 44.1 kilohertz without kind of messing up the sound. And so the CD release of this never sounded quite as good as what I remember the vinyl release sounding. But they've since, Telek has since, I guess, a decade or so ago, pulled out these 50 kilohertz recordings and redid them as DSD. And that delivers a much more kind of faithful reproduction of what the original digital sounded. So I was listening to this the other day, and I'm used to CDs, right, where you've got, this album has 8 tracks or whatever. So I figured I can just kind of navigate to the 8 tracks. When I go to the queue, though, I only see 2. Being a classical music piece, there's different movements that are kind of grouped together, and so Roon is in the queue. They've kind of bunched them up all together, but I do have the ability to, where's the button?
Parts.
View parts here, and now I can access all the different parts. Maybe I want to just skip to this part here, for example. So it's kind of like those index things on early CDs. You had an index button as well as a track button. That's the best analogy that I have, and that analogy only works for people who had a CD player in the 80s or 90s. But it's a little bit of a different type of thing. I haven't looked to see what this interface looks like on the phone or on a tablet, but I imagine it looks pretty much the same, just a little smaller. But that was something that maybe it existed in 1.7, but I didn't really run into it very much. So I just thought I'd mention that in case you run into it or are curious about it. How they've from what I've heard, they've made a lot of improvements to how the UI organizes and presents classical music. And so if that's a genre that is a priority to you, it should suck less now than it did before, I think, is the commitment that they've offered. If that makes any sense. Right. So I should pull up the thing that Stephen asked me to kind of walk through. Let me find the right web page. There we go. All right, cool. Everybody see that okay? It's a little, maybe that's one too many clicks. All right, so these are things that he had another meeting or another photography gig or something like that. He divides his time between audio and photography. I enjoy both of those things as well, but I find that I can only do one at a time. I guess that's maybe what he's finding too. So he's doing more photography and less audio stuff. But he's been messing around with Roon a little bit as well. He offered a link here. I should share this, I guess. Share to anybody who has a link. Done. Oh, hang on. I should copy the link. Copy link, and let me find chat. Not that. Hang on. I'm not good at mice. Here we go. When you're presenting something, the chat window gets a little hidden. All right, cool. So now you have a link to this thing. This is a YouTube video that has some guy on Cobas, I guess, who goes into some depth about the new Roon.8 stuff. So if you want to get an actual professional person's take on it, that is probably worth your time. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but it's probably pretty good. Hans Biegenhausen has reviewed some gear. Steven's got a particular interest in, as you know, audiophile networking types of things and digital demangling and all that kind of stuff. And so there's this new high-end USB reclocker thing that is, I guess, around $2,000 or so, however that translates from euros to us. The Denafrips people, I guess, have been putting out a lot of high-value-ish DACs and digital components. So I don't have any personal experience with them, but I know that I see online a lot of people talking about their stuff. Is anybody using one?
Nope.
Anyway, they have a new thing. I don't understand how it could be a USB reclocker that doesn't have a USB out, but whatever. Check it out if that solves a problem that you feel that you have. There's a 5 to 30 volt power supply if you need to power things, and the phone charger that's lying in your drawer unused is not sufficient. For only €1,000, you can get a fancier power thingy, and Hans talks a bit about that in, I guess, this link here, probably. Geek tweak of the week. So Stephen has this gigantic Averest power strip supply thing. It has some ground pins on it, and he suggests that if you're using some of the Sonore stuff, that you try connecting those ground wires to see if that reduces leakage current in your system. I don't have anything quite that fancy in my system, but I do have the iFi audio power station, which does have a way to kind of sort out the grounding issues. Dagogo, Constantine over at Dagogo published an article just this morning that I had submitted a while back about how I'd sorted some grounding issues in my system using that stuff. The iFi solution, is around 50 or 60 bucks or $100 depending on which kind of pieces you buy. I assume that the Everest thing with a name like that is more than that. So if you want to look at a fancy solution, this might be worth considering, or a more cost-effective solution. The thing that I was doing in my system was, since I had taken everything apart to kind of clean things up at the start of this year, I got up my voltmeter and I was measuring the potential difference between the kind of the outside RCA sleeve, I guess what we call signal ground of all the different components, to see if I connected a RCA cable between the components, if that would result in current flowing between them. If there's a voltage difference, then grounding them together with an RCA cable is going to result in some current flow. So I wanted to try to minimize any of potential difference before I connected everything back up. And I noticed for some combinations of equipment, there was a pretty big difference. The difference in voltage between the signal ground, or the outside RCA collar on my analog preamp and my subwoofer was about 32 volts. So if I connected my preamp to my subwoofer, then there would be, potentially a fair amount of current just flowing over that ground connection. The grounding problem ended up being on the preamp side. So I was able to use iFi's groundhog solution to ground it. I think that the Emotiva preamp that I'm using is, even though it has a ground pin in the connection, that's only for grounding the case. It's not for grounding the signal. For whatever reason, they've decided to leave the signal ground floating. And so using the iFi solution, it's somewhat intelligent. It tries to figure out whether it needs to do anything or not. And if it does, then it'll take care of that. And after I made that connection, after I connected up the groundhog thing, the potential difference between my sub and my preamp, even with no connections, interconnects between them, was 0.03 millivolts or something like that. Really, really small. So I was less concerned about connecting them together. So I think what he's talking about here is along those same kind of lines, but just for people who have more money than I do. But there's a picture of this thing.
I tried that. Didn't make any difference in my system.
I think that's in an ideal case, it shouldn't. Everything should just, be zero anyway, but there you go. And then he offers some music selections. recommendations that you can explore on your own. I would have liked to have seen links to Kobas and title for these, but you can search for them and find them quickly enough.
Yeah.
So I think that is about all that I had to share. Oh, one other little thing, I guess, since I have a browser window open. My latest toy is this little tiny DAC. The picture here doesn't really do it justice. This whole thing is only a tiny bit larger than a credit card. It's a very small DAC, and in spite of that, it has balanced and unbalanced outputs both for headphones and for line level equipment. So there's a 4.4 millimeter Pentacon connection for balanced headphones, which works brilliantly with my Sennheiser HD 650s, and then a single-ended 3.5 millimeter jack. And then on the back, maybe they show it. On the back, there are, it's not the right button. On the back, there are these three RCA jacks, but the RCA jacks are not normal RCA jacks. They've got an extra collar or sleeve inside of them. And so they're this new format that Khadas is trying to popularize, and they've open sourced it so anybody can implement them for free. They don't get any royalties for it or anything, but it's a balanced RCA connection. So if you have balanced RCA cables, you get a balanced connection. So I've ordered some RCA to XLR cables so that I can connect this thing to the balanced inputs of my preamp. And apparently this particular DAC gets a little bit better kind of signal to noise ratio. I think that AMR or Amir over at Audio Science Review measured, and it's an IAD of minus 118 decibels through balanced versus 113 through the single-ended connection. So I don't think I can hear either one of those, but it'll be fun to kind of play with it once those cables come in. There's also an I2S input, but I don't know if that actually works for I2S signals since it's a USB format. It serves a dual purpose though, and can be used as a separate dedicated power inlet so that when you are connecting it to, for example, a Raspberry Pi or a computer, it's not drawing that 5-volt power from the host transport or computer device. It can get power from a cleaner source. And I've measured, it actually does work. So if I connect a 5-volt power to this second USB-C port, this one draws absolute zero current from the host that it's connected to. I got one of those little USB current / voltage measuring things just because I was curious about stuff like that. The volume knob that it has on top is kind of interesting. If it works as a normal volume knob, but if you pull it forward a couple of times, it can switch among several different modes. One of which allows you to change the ESS filters that the DAC is using. Another of which allows you to kind of switch this volume knob into a control where you can do play, pause, skip types of things in Roon. So if you're listening to an album and you want to just kind of go to the next song, you can rotate the dial and it will skip to the next song, or you rotate it the other direction, it'll rewind to the previous song. So it acts as kind of a human interface device for Roon, as well as controlling the functions of the DAC. It's incredibly confusing and incredibly unfortunate that they've overloaded 18 different functions into a single knob. Switching between modes requires that you click it forward twice, but if you click it forward 3 times, that locks the knob so that it can't be used at all, so that it stops you from accidentally using it. But if your double click and triple click are not synchronized very well, as is the case with me sometimes, you end up locking it unintentionally when you're just trying to switch modes. If you like frustrating yourself and saying bad words, there's a lot of potential for enjoyment with this particular device. But left on its own, without fiddling with it, I just have it sitting in my audio rack. It does a really, really nice job. So this is my kind of new toy for a while. It's about $200. It's an MQA full decoder. It's the cheapest MQA full decoder, least expensive, whatever you want to say, that I'm aware of available anywhere. I think that honor previously went to the Project S2 digital whatever pre thing, but at $400. But this is a $200 full MQA decoder, and all that stuff seems to work as well. It does MQA authentication, it does MQA decoding. I can't hear any difference. I only care about whether the mastering quality is any good. Delivery format's really tough for me to get excited about, as long as it's reasonably lossless.
So it's a
but it
Roon
is-
endpoint? It's a Roon
it is-
endpoint?
It is not, but I have it connected to a Raspberry Pi, and so that those two together, there's no Ethernet port on the back of this, right? So
Oh,
connected to a Raspberry Pi, it becomes a Roon endpoint. It's very well
Great.
supported by Linux, because if you look at kind of what these guys do, most of what they do is build little computers that run Linux. They happen to also make a couple of audio soundboard, sound card things, but most of their business is on the Linux side rather than on the sound side. So very good support for Linux, including the human interface components. Anyway, if you're looking for something for a second zone, it works great. It also works really well if I connect it to my LG phone. The only problem is that it draws a hell of a lot of current. So I think it would run my phone from a full charge to flat probably before I got to the end of whatever album I was playing at the time. But it has that second port that you can connect, like a Anchor, power, 10,000 milliamp hour power adapter thing. So if you were going to go on an international flight, you could, strap the DAC to your phone to this, USB power brick, assuming they let you bring stuff like that on the airplane, and be able to run it for a pretty long time. So unlike like the iFi audio hip DAC, there's no internal battery, and it will drain power from whatever you have it connected to at a fairly good clip. It does run pretty warm. And I measured the current that it draws. It seems to draw around 420 to 430 milliamps. So about almost a half an amp of current is what it's drawing just when it's kind of sitting there idle. But a fun toy, $200. And then the balance to XLR cables are like $50 or whatever. So I'm looking forward to playing with that a little bit more. DACs change so fast that I can't be bothered to spend much more than a couple $100 on a DAC, to be honest. Anyway, I just go through them really, really quickly. Deb will tell you I've got bins and bins of them.
Oh gosh.
Anyway, anybody have anything you want to share before we drop off? Anything you've been messing around with that you'd like to tell your audio compatriots about?
Not audio.
Or adult beverages or whatever else is legal?
So I had never heard of a balanced RCA before.
Yeah, no, me too. I hope to show you some at some point.
Okay.
It's apparently a thing, and I guess for these smaller format devices, like they could have chosen the the smaller micro XLR as well, but I guess all that's just too fiddly and dodgy, so they came up with a new format. We'll see if it catches on or not. I don't know.
So I wonder if
require
they'll
special
eventually.
drivers.
No. Sorry, say again.
Special drivers, or are those already out there on Linux or something?
Yeah, it's supported by. There is a special driver for Windows. I tested that. Works fine. For Mac OS and Linux, you just plug it in and it works. And when you plug it into Linux and you look at the D-message output, it says, "Hey, not only have I detected that you connected to me an audio interface, I also see a human interface device, an HID device, and it shows like all the information about HID device as well, so that the play, pause, skip, and all that other nonsense Linux seems to recognize too.
Fast moving field. Wow.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy stuff. So it's like a better AudioQuest Dragonfly. It supports PCM up to 768 kilohertz and DSD 8X, and I tested all those things. They all work great. But it draws a lot more current than an AudioQuest Dragonfly. So
sure.
For a portable use case, you're going to want to bring a car battery with you to keep it running.
On the plane.
Apart from that, it's perfect.
Well, thanks for putting this on tonight.
Yeah, this was a great episode tonight, David. I'm sure we didn't have that many people on live, but I think we're going to get a million hits on YouTube.
Yeah, and we've got some follow-ups, right? I think we want to, do that playlist sharing thing. I may do a little bit more research and see if there's a better way to do that kind of stuff.
That would be nice.
I think I one of the things I do love, and I mentioned this before about having title, is that I can get with a group of guys like you or other folks that are on the club, and we can do a virtual kind of listening session. We can each get a beer in our separate listening rooms and say, all right, here's a playlist that I suggest we plow through, and I can share a link, or we can collaborate in advance, and then we can just kind of roll through the same playlist and get on SMS or on on Google Hangouts or whatever, and make comments about what we're hearing. And you know, it's not the same as being in the same room, but
Right.
you get some of that same kind of capability through the technology that we have, and it's not really that difficult to set up. It doesn't take much effort. So
It's not like the days of mixtapes that you'd have to pass around physically.
right, exactly. Dubbing these things and sending them
And
off
it's
to your
a good-
friends.
Yeah, it's a good way to find new music too. That's what I
Oh,
like.
In a way, it's
That's
kind
right.
of, in a way, it's kind of better than being in the same room because you don't make any noise when you make your comments.
That is true. Yeah, sometimes
You just write down piece of shit.
You
Where
can,
did
you
you
can
find
just
this
text
crap?
everybody.
there are those awkward moments when you invite somebody for a listening session that you wish you hadn't because they talk through the entire time. So yeah, it avoids that for sure. But yeah, it's one of the things that I miss about, you know, I mean, I've had dozens of people over to the loft for listening, either random people that I've brought in from work or people from the club or people from the neighborhood or anybody that I can convince to come up there that doesn't feel like I'm going to molest them or whatever. And
Like you
you know,
usually do.
it's just it's and like they'll put on music that I would never listen to, and I discover some things, and hopefully I show them some things about what's possible with 2-channel playback that they hadn't considered before, and we both learn from each other, and it's great, and I miss being able to do that kind of thing, but hopefully we'll be able to get back to it.
That is why I like Roon Radio, though. I mean, I know there are times where it really annoys me, and like some of the choices it makes after what I've listened to, it's like, that's nothing like that. I hate that. Stop
Yeah.
playing that music. But other times it's like, oh, wow, who's that? And
Right.
you go over and look at your phone and take a screenshot of it and
Yeah.
get back to them and look at their discography. And it's like, I had no idea this person has 38 albums. I've never heard of them.
Yeah, no,
Or
I've
in my
discovered
case-
artists like that and gone on to buy like half of their collection because I like so much of their stuff.
That's it. You know, it's like if you like a particular piece of music, you know, whether it's Beethoven's Ninth, and you suddenly discover you have 50 albums, different versions, you know, and you're trying to discriminate. What am I going to toss?
I do wish for radio that they had more than just a thumbs up and thumbs down. I wish there was
It's a-
something that's stronger than
similar
a
issue with
thumbs up, like
photography.
a heart and like a middle finger, maybe for the ones that you really don't like. I think that would be nice to have too, but you know, we can make those suggestions on the Roon community and see what comes of it.